Gemara. We are up to Daf Yud Daled Amud Beis. The last Mishnah we learned was two cases where we're continuing the arguments between Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Lezer versus Rabbi Yeshua, whether she's believed or not. And in this Mishnah over here, we just saw them speaking according to Zeiri in a seclusion, or we see her pregnant. We, according to Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Lezer, we trust her, the status of this child and the person that she consorted with, even though she has no real migui or chazaka. And Rabbi Yeshua says that we don't believe her at all, especially in this case, because there's no migui chazaka backing her up. So we're up to the Gemara Daf Yud Amud Aleph, and a discussion between Abaye and his teacher Rabba, about 10 lines on the top of the page. So first Abaye had a discussion with Rabbi Yosef, now he moves to his other teacher. Ramele Abaye the Rabba. So Abaye turned around to his other teacher Rabba and he asked him the following question. Umi Amar Rabbi Yeshua Einen Amenes. You're telling me Rabbi Yeshua says she's not believed when she wants to say who the status or the status of the child is. But let me ask a question. We learned, hey, Rabbi Yeshua himself testified, and so too Rabbi Yehuda ben Pseira, al almonas Isa. Isa means dough. When you put together dough, you put a lot of particles together, different ingredients together. So it's an expression when you want to say that there's a suffix, but it's compounded, it's more than just one doubt, then it's permitted. Now, generally a suffix, a doubt, so we say it depends if it's a suffix in the Torah, we are strict, and a suffix Rabbanan, we are lenient. And even a suffix in the Torah, there's an argument, the Rambam and the Rashba, whether why are we stricter? Are we stricter because the Torah told us to, which is what the Rashba says in most opinions? Well, the Rambam says that itself is the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan said when it's a suffix of the Torah, let's be machmer. Then we have a concept called a svek sveika. And usually a svek sveika means that in the suffix itself, that it's, for example, did she consort with somebody, with a stranger before she got engaged or after she got engaged? Now, if it was after she got engaged, we're in trouble, right? But even in that 50% chance that it's after she got engaged, could be that she was forced into it. So then we're not in trouble. So we took the 50% and reduced it by some percentage points. It's now we have a majority of probability that she's permitted to her husband. So according to the Rashba in Chuvit 401, that's the basis for svek sveika. Because it becomes a law of probability. So svek sveika means a suffix in a suffix. The Rivash learns that we only have 3 levels. We have either aser, vadai aser, or we have a suffix aser, or it's permitted. There's no other levels. So the first suffix takes it out of vadai and puts it in the realm of suffix. The second suffix takes it out of suffix and puts it in the next level, which is mutter. And there are other ways of understanding as well. But the bottom line is a suffix is a suffix and a suffix. Rashi comes up here with a brand new type of svek sveika. So what's the case here of almonas Isa? According to Rashi, almonas Isa is that there was a woman, let's say Leah was married to somebody and the person threw her a get, and like we had in Marivamas, we're not sure if the get was closer to her, so she's a divorcee, or the get is closer to him and she is not a divorcee. Then a month later, he died. So now she is a suffix of being a widow or a suffix divorcee. As a widow, she can marry a kohen. As a divorcee, she cannot. She married a kohen. So now, and then had a child. That child now is a suffix, whether he is a cholol or whether he's not a cholol. If the mother was a widow, she's not a cholol. If the mother was a divorcee, he is a cholol. Then a woman married the son. Now and then he died. So she's now she's a suffix. Is she the widow of a cholol or or not? And therefore she cannot marry. That's called a svek sveika. And almonas Isa could marry a kohen because of svek sveika. Now really it's not a svek sveika. But why is this called svek sveika? Is because the suffix is in 2 different people. And because the suffix in 2 different people, it's lowering a standard because Rashi says each one has their own cheskas kashas. So you double the 2 cheskas kashas and it seems it becomes like a svek sveika. That's how Rashi learns. Taisa learns that, no, we're talking about that there's a suffix, svek sveika is simple. There was a suffix chol that got mixed up in the family. And then so 2 things. And then she married, we don't know who that is. So first of all, whoever the chol is a suffix. And even if the person that she married that's a chol, but it's only a suffix, so it's a svek sveika. So first of all, so it's a suffix whether it's a chol, and even the chol, we're not sure if that was her husband. That's called a svek sveika. That's how Rashi. That's how what he called Taisa learns. Rashi then brings his teacher as well, Rabbi Yosef Tov Ilam, who has another pshat altogether. And there he says basically that the mother who's a question of whether she's a widow or whether she's a divorcee. What happened was that the husband died, right? The question is a widow or divorcee, and then she got married within 3 months. And this child is a suffix if it's from the first husband, knows prior to the get, or even after the get, if it's her husband a Yisrael, so there's no problem, or from the second husband. So the sex maker, first of all, was a mother, a widow, a divorcee, and even the mother was a divorcee, the child might be the child from the first husband, not from the second husband, the kohen that she married. So that's a sex maker. Anyway, getting back to the Gemara. So Yehud Yeshua, I'm going to say this to testify regarding an almanas isa. She's permitted to marry a kohen. She's permitted to marry a kohen. So we see that what? Because she says, I'm all right. And Rabbi Shua is the one who's lenient. Till now, we say that if we ask her, who's that person you had relations with, and she says a kohen, we don't believe her. And over here, in Almanas Isa, where it's a suffix, Rabbi Shua says, yes, she's believed that she's all right, and she's not a chol. So we answer back, Rabbi answered Abaye, Hachi Hashi, comparing this case here, where she married to the case in our Mishnah, where she was doing, mezana, she's being promiscuous, and she was going she's getting married. She obviously did her investigations, and she's happy to get married. It means that her investigations came up that she's all right. So we trust her. Even if she will trust her. Here, she was talking about znus. We saw her consulting with somebody, or she wasn't married to. So znus, you think she checks out the yichud, the pedigree of somebody before she's mezana with them? Omar Rava, so Rava comes along and says to his teacher, or he says generally, Rabbi Yeshua Kashi, you people, you, Abaye and my Rabbi, were discussing the contradiction. Rabbi Yeshua, do you believe her, don't believe her? What about Rabbi Gamliel? Like Kashi, we also have no question there. Rabbi Gamliel says we do believe her. Get in that very same Mishnah, Tani Sefer, in that very same place. It says, very Mishnah, it says, Rabbi Gamliel disagreed. He said, Kibalnu Eiduschem. I hear what you say. Abba Ma'ana said, what can I do? Shadi Gozer Rabbi Yechon Bezak. Rabbi Yechon Bezak decreed, Shaloi Lohi Shebezdin Al Kach. We will not have a bezin set up and accept her. We will only be machbir when it comes to koinim. We're not going to believe her. So here, Rabbi Gamliel is the one. Rabbi Gamliel now Mishnahs and all the Mishnah says you believe her, and dafke by almanas isa we have a svek svek. Everyone says you don't believe her. And why isn't that a problem? Why only just dealing with Rabbi Yeshua? Why isn't it a problem here with Rabbi Gamliel? I'll explain to you. Rabbi Gamliel, you know why? In all the cases we had tonight, you know why Rabbi Gamliel believes her? Because she's coming with a definitive answer. She says, I know that I was not Mazan, was a Mukas H, or I know that it happened after we got engaged. Mishalastichan and Nasti. She knows. So she's coming forward with a bari, with a declaration, this is what happened, and he doesn't. Somebody, therefore we trust her. Together, we trust her. Even with the no Migach, we trust because she's a body. Or she has a Cheskes Kashas. Shema. Over here, does she know what happened with that woman? The problem was a get landed. We're not sure if it's closer to her or closer to him. So there's no research. It's a shema. At the end of the day, she doesn't know for a fact. That's why Rabbi Gamliel says in this case, she's usher, it's a suffix call, we have to be machmer. Now, what about Rabbi Shua? Rabbi Shua will be exactly the opposite. Rabbi Shua, not like Tasha. I'll give you another answer for Rabbi Shua, why it's not a contradiction. Hassam over there, you know what? Rabbi Shua doesn't believe in the case when we see her pregnant and we ask her where it is. There's only one suffix here. She definitely consorted. The question is with who? Somebody suitable or somebody unsuitable? So there's only one suffix. By one suffix, Rishur says we are machmer. Hasam, chatzvek, I don't care if she's a bori. One suffix, we're very machmer. But hach, in the case of the almanas isa, today's fake, there are two doubts. Remember, like Great Rashi learns. First about the son, whether he's a chol or not, and then this is the widow of the son. So it's two different people. So it's a svek, and therefore we are lenient. And there, in this case, even though it's only a shem, which doesn't know for a fact, we're going to be lenient for svek. Hilchah comes out of, he said, Rabbi says, an interesting conclusion. The main focus is alim le body, whether she is saying it like, definitively, even though there's only one doubt, we see her pregnant, or we saw her alone with somebody, and there's only one doubt who the person is, but that's about it. Nevertheless, machshit, because she's a body, we will trust her. But the Kile Shema, but if she doesn't know what actually happened, even if a sveka, we're not going to trust her. Even though Monasis is a sveka, but since she doesn't know, we cannot verify it. We're not going to allow her marrying a kohen. That Philip is like, "Nami possible." Yisrael is possible. Rabbi Shua, the other way around. Rabbi Shua said we don't trust her. But alim that one suffix was so machmir that feel borinami possible. Even if she says definitively this would happen, we don't trust her. Of the kile svexveker, the case of the almanas isa where there's a svexveker, I feel a b'shemanami machshir. Even just it's not because we're trusting anybody's edus, it's because it's a svexveker which makes it more lenient. Talk about me learned. What's the now we learn a brisa which is very cryptic. Turns out to be the three opinions of the brisa. One is the Tanakama, and two, how to understand Rameir. I'm going to try to work out what actually happened. It seems that an essential word is missing from the entire brisa. Yesterday, we didn't even want to edit the brisa one word to fit in. Here, we're going to change the whole shot of the brisa around because we're going to say something is missing. And it goes as follows. Eizu almanasisa. The brisa says, what's the definition of almanasisa? Give me a scenario where you have an almanasisa. Kol she'ein ba. This is, we're talking about a case where there's no question, there's no question of mamzeris here. The it's not a question whether that person that she married was a mamzer, because the isa means the number of sveikas. Our suffix is, the case of a chol. That's all. Whether there was a chol here or not, because she married a kohen and she's a question whether she's an almana or whether she's a grusha. We're not sure if she's a widow or she's a divorcee. And then she married a kohen. So there's a suffix chol, and the child is suffix chol. That's the only question. There's no question here that she lived with a mamzer or that she lived with an asin, which are, you're not allowed to marry that nation of the sinim. They're the one who masqueraded and maybe lived far away. The loy mishum avdi malach, nor they from Shloim Melech's avodi, remember living Mari Vamas. They end up to Zvav, what they did. They tried to marry Yiddish girls. And as long as none of those fakers are involved, the only stuff that we have is chol, everything is all right. And she's kosher to marry. That's the Tanakama. Comes along a mayor. The mayor said, Shemaiti, I heard. A mayor says, I heard that if it doesn't have any of these questions included, is Masiin Lakuna. You can marry a kohen. Sounds like he's saying exactly this. He's echoing the words of Tanakama. Tanakama says, as long as they don't have any fakers of mamzer sin and avdi malachim, she can marry a kohen. And comes on a man says exactly the same thing. That as long as she doesn't have any of these fakers, you can marry a kohen. So the Gemara is going to try to work out the cipher of what is Rameir saying or how is he arguing. Comes along Rav Shimon ben Elazar, Rameir. Shimon ben Elazar says, I have a different version of Rameir. And what's my version of Rameir? The Chayin of Shimon ben Asya, Shimon ben Asya said to Shimon ben Elazar, I heard the same thing, and that is, so what's the case of an almanas isa? Kol shenit mabo safik chol. The case of almanas isa is that what got mixed in here was a safik chol, which again sounds exactly what we said till now. That what's almanas isa? If there's a chol, that's what Tanakama said. That's what the first version of Meir says, and now comes the second version and says the same thing. But then they continue. Everybody knows who the mamzerim are. It's common knowledge to keep away from these people. So therefore, everyone is aware. And we do not know who the chalolin are. So what is that? Now it sounds like you're giving us a reason why a safek chol should be forbidden. Because we don't know who the safek chol is, therefore we should be more machmir. Sounds like it's contradicting himself. Starts off saying the same like everybody else, that if the mom's of the got a problem, but if it's only the chol, she can marry a kohen. And now you tell me, because we don't know who the chol is, sounds like you're trying to say, therefore you should not marry. So let's understand what's going on. I'm going to try to analyze it, but I said, what are these three opinions? You said, our teacher said, kosher. Sounds like Tanakama hol, but the only issue here is a chol. Now let's first understand. Now we're not saying a safek chol. He didn't mention a word about a safek chol. It sounds like a chol itself. But if she married a chol, if there's a safek of a safek of man is the problem, but a safek of a chol is no problem. Now, why should we be more lenient with a safek of a chol than a safek of a mamzer? Why? Because the Raisa, why are we so strict if there's a safek that she married a mamzer? We're very strict. Why? Because the safek of a Torah. Nu chol nami the Raisa. Chol also says that if a kohen marries somebody, he shouldn't be married. The kids are chalolim. So if there's a cholol, why are we more lenient if we're not sure if she married a chol or not than if she married a mamzer? That's question number one. We don't understand the distinction. Number two, the second part is Lameir came along and said, Shamaiti kosher bet I heard that if you don't have any of these fakers, mamzer and the sin and amalachim, you can marry a kohen. Nu hayna tanakama. How is he differentiating himself from the Tanakama? That's question number 2. Now let's go to opinion number 3. So what was the third opinion of Shimon Elazar? The chain of Shimon Asya that within Rab Meir itself comes along Shimon Elazar. They say I have a different shot. They say that Shimon Asya agrees with Shimon Elazar that what? If got mixed in, there was a suffix cholol, that sounds like the same thing. And then you say, Makidin Yisrael Mamzedim, they didn't know, generally recognize the Mamzedim amongst them, so they keep away from them. But the Ein Makidin Chalolim, they don't recognize the Chalolim, and therefore you have to be more machmir. That so you started off saying the whole thing that the chol is the only one that we're leaning with, and now you're concluding that what? That because we don't know the chalolim, and therefore what? Therefore we should be machmir. What's going on here? So the Gemara now explains. Rabbi Yechon says, "I'll tell you what's going on here. This is a special case. We're not talking about a general case here that you know that if something mamzer, something this is a problem and a so called problem. This is the case. Mamzer tzavach, the cholol shaisik. What happened here was that when people allege that regarding your yichus, your ancestry, if they call you a mamzer, you scream out in protest. You say, Baba Mises. No, it's not true. However, when in the cholol, they call you a cholol shaisik, you don't say anything. Now we're talking about you were called out both. Not that somebody called you out a chol in the Stam Veltrein and you didn't say anything, you didn't bother answering. But because by mamza you did bother answering, and by chol you didn't, how do we read what just happened here? So this is the case. By mamza you protested, and by chol you remained mum. So ikibbenai, that's the case, and that's what they were all arguing on. Tanakama says, kol pasul de korele b'shosi puzzle. If somebody accuses you of being puzzle and you keep quiet, it sounds like you're agreeing with them. It's a tacit agreement. Tanakama. So this is what Tanakama says. What's Almonas Isa? Kol she'ein ba. If we don't have a situation, loy, and we're going to add the word shtoik mamzeris. In other words, there's no silence when it comes to mamzer. They accuse you of being a mamzer, you protest. There's no silence there, because if you'd have been silent, that means you agree you're a mamzer. There's no silence of a mamzer there. There's no protest there at all. And there's no silence. You actually protested. And you weren't silent when they accused you of being a not and a sinner. Nor the Tanakama says all 4 cases. You have to protest. If you don't protest, it's a tacit agreement, as if you're saying, yes, you're right. Whatever you accuse me of, you're 100% right. And we make no distinction between a mamzer or a cholol. We're talking about a case here is where they made an allegation, and according to Tanakama, when you said there's no mamzer, not there was no mamzeris, there was no silence when it came to mamzeris. There was no silence to any of them. Whatever you're accused of, if you're silent, I don't care what it is, even a chol, that means you agree. So you had to protest. That's Tanakama. Comes a man and says, it depends. Comes a man says, not everything you have to protest. I'm going to make a distinction between a chol and the rest. By a chol, you don't have to protest. The rest you do. Well, what's the difference? Very simple. When somebody's accused of being a mamzer, what you're really saying is you cannot marry a Jewish woman. If somebody is accused of being a Abdei Melech, cannot marry a Jewish woman because they were going like Hurdus. But if somebody is accused of being a chol, okay, you can't marry a kohen. You can marry the vast majority of the Jewish people, so you don't bother even protesting. That's what a mayor says. The first 3, because he's accused of being a mamzer or whatever he is, he cannot marry any Jewish woman. So therefore, if he doesn't protest, that means he agrees. Because otherwise, he would scream out, "What are you doing? What are you saying?" But if somebody accuses somebody of being a chol and doesn't bother answering, kosher. He's kosher because he doesn't bother answering. He doesn't really care. Even according to you, I can marry most of the Yidden, so who cares? But you know why? Don't read into his silence that he's agreeing. Say the only reason why, because he's dismissive. He doesn't really care because he can still marry 99% of the Yidden. 90% of the Yidden doesn't really care. And the truth of the matter is, he's not a chol. But why fight? It doesn't really matter. Says what's that? That's the second. That's Rameir. Comes along Rab Shimon Elazar Tanakama Rameir. He goes and he argues with Kama to the first version of Rameir. They're arguing. Rab Shimon Elazar, Rab Shimon Asher arguing what Rameir actually said. He's arguing. You first Tana in Rameir said that what? That everything you have to protest. I say exactly the opposite. Ish milach. If you heard The machshir Rameh b'shtika. There's an instance where Rameh says, even if you didn't protest, you're all right, you're kosher. Not the case that you say by chol. On the contrary, since nobody knows who chol is, if he's accused of being a chol and he's silent, that means he's a Greek. Everyone knows who the mamzerim are. So you start in the world, go call somebody a mamzer. Doesn't care because everyone knows he's not a mamzer, so why should you bother protesting? Everyone knows who the mamzerim are. So you accuse him of being a mamzer in the Sina Avdei Melech, he doesn't bother protesting. But when it comes to chalal, because we don't know who the chalalim are, it's something very, private, then you should have protested. By not protesting, Rameir says, that is a tacit agreement. El Dekarli Mamzer. B'shasik, and he was quiet, proves nothing. Behind the shasik, somebody said, look, Mamzer Kol Yisrael, everyone knows who Mamzerim are. Why do I have to get into fight for you? You're happy, call me a Mamzer, call me a Mamzer. How many people call each other a Mamzer? Means nothing. Aval Mamzer v'tzavach Chol v'shoisik, when we're having doubt, in our case here, when we called you out and said a Mamzer, you screamed out. When we called you a Chol, you were quiet. In this case, we're going to say puzzle. Why are you going to puzzle? Because people don't know who the chol is. So why are you quiet? You know why you're quiet? Because you're scared that if you're going to start making an issue out of it, people are going to start investigating, and they might uncover the taki you are a chol. Mamzer, everyone knows the mamzer are. You don't really, So therefore, even if they investigate, what are they going to find? But when it comes to chol, the reason why you're quiet is because you want to let it pass over. You don't want to make a big deal out of it, and you're scared that people start investigating. They will find out that you're a chol because we don't know who the cholalim are. And that's why you're quiet. So that's why we read into your silence as if you're agreeing. Somebody holds mistay. It's better to lemafkele. I don't want to be taken out of the call. I don't want to investigate me. That's how Rashi learned. Tracy learns differently. So we learned Rabbi says like mamzer kosher. Rabbi says if somebody was quiet when he was accused of being a mamzer, proves nothing. He's kosher. Strike chol, but if somebody is quiet when they accuse him of being a chol, pasul, that means he agrees. But Tanya, either in another brisa, the other way around. Shtoik chol kosher. If somebody's accused of being a chol and they're quiet, it's kosher. They didn't bother arguing. And shtoik mamzer, pasul. But if he was quiet by a mamzer, he's pasul. What's going on there? Like kasha. This is the first version of Rameir who says that chol is chol you don't care about. You only care about by mamzer and other ones because they're saying you're accusing you of not being able to marry a Jewish person. Therefore, you have to scream out. If you're quiet, means you agree. But by chol, who cares? You're marrying anyway. So the silence by chol means nothing. And the other ones of Shimon Lazar Rameir says the other way around. By mamzer, you don't really care, but by chol, you don't want anyone to investigate because we don't know who the chalalim are. Next Mishnah. Rabbi Yasi. Ma'isa, there was this incident between a young girl. She yarded lemalis ma'im and she went out of the city. She went out to the well to draw water. Vanessa and somebody raped her. And the question is, was this only regarding that if she can marry a kohen in the future? That person who raped her, was it someone that she was also to live with? Then she can never marry a kohen in the future, or not? What do we assume? Most of the people, majority of people in that city will live around there. If the Rave are kosher, they're Yidden, then Sue is one of them, unfortunately, and therefore she can marry a Kohen. But if most of the people, majority of people say Goyim, then she cannot marry a Kohen. So no, Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri requires to have Rave Sherin. Now, yesterday we learned that according to one opinion, according to Rabbi Gamliel, we said yes, Rabbi Levi said, and Rabbi Yosef agreed that if, according to Rabbi Gamliel, says that you believe her, then even if it's Roy Psulin Etzla, even the majority of people are apostles, we don't care. We're trusting her, and therefore, if she tells us that it was a proper person, then if that's the person she consorted with, that's good enough. Even Roy Psulin. That's if Rabbi Yeshua holds that as apostle, he says even if Roy Shadin is apostle, Rabbi Yechon ben Nuri requires Roy Shadin before you believe her. So who does he hold like? He says, who does he follow? We trust her that whatever she says, that the person it was. I feel but if Nami Maksha, then even the majority of people apostles should be kosher. Why do they insist that it has to be the majority of people has to be kosher? And he can be Shua hold that we don't trust her, then I feel but if Nami apostle, then even the majority of people are kosher, we don't trust her. Amalei, he said, Hachi Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rab. I'm talking about over here. The kroinos shel tipoide hayamaisa. We're talking about over here. This is out between the wagons. It was a market day, so you have a number of foreigners coming into the city as well. And Ukarab Ami like Rab Ami. Rab Ami says, we need to have two roivs over here. So here we have numbers. Even though Rabbi Shua doesn't believe, we're following Rabbi Shua, and even though that Rabbi Shua said we don't believe there's a Roiv Ksherin. Here you have a double Roiv. You have the locals that are Roiv, and the people who are coming into the market. We're talking about Roiv of the people, the influx of people are also kosher. And even Rabbi Shua, who says generally you don't believe it, but you don't, but a double Roiv Ksherin we will believe. Why a double Roiv is believed more than a single Roiv, we'll see tomorrow in the Gemara. Okay, we'll stop here. Actually, we'll go two more lines. Rabami says, Rabami says we need that the people, the influx of people, the majority of them should be kosher. This follows Rabbiana. Rabbiana says, so let's say someone had forced himself upon her out there amongst the wagons, it's in the marketplace, she's kosher l'koyin. The crane is has to be dafke between the wagons. Only if she was nivel. No, if she was nivel in the city and there's a roiv, it's not good enough because according to Rabbi Shua. But if it was the time of the market, a market day, so you have two roivs, the locals and the influx of people coming into the city, a double roiv, she will be kosher to kuna. I will Peter if somebody from Tzapori. It's definitely somebody from the city of Tzapori. The majority of people are kosher. Had relations with her, have lat shtuki. The child is shtuki because one raiv, according to Rabbi Shua, is not good enough. It's only a double raiv. Abdimi came along and said, name is Zidi, name of Chanina. The others say Abdimi wasn't Abdimi, but just Zidi said, name of Chanina. We follow the majority of the city. We don't go after the majority of the influx of people. Before the Gemara goes further, we say, Klapilaya, which way are you going? It shouldn't be the other way around. Hani Naidi. Okay, this starts a new ruling. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Okay, so the bottom line is at the moment we're up to the Gemara. Rabbi Yechidori follows Rabbi Shua, and the reason why we assume that it's kosher because of a double raiv over here. And now tomorrow we'll talk about why a double raiv is so special and the idea, the difference between a raiv and a kavua, which we'll discuss tomorrow. Okay, have a good day, everybody.